Welcome and hello. This is a video tutorial on HEC ResSim, and in today's lesson, I'm going to be discussing downstream control rules. This is one of the main reservoir rules, and we're going to be discussing it. All right, so I'm in the reservoir network module in ResSim. I've got a connected network sketched out here with some junction points, a reservoir, a couple reaches, and we're going to go ahead and edit the reservoir. So go ahead and right click on the reservoir and click Edit Reservoir Properties. And here we are. I've created a few zones. Zone B is the guide curve that I've set. Sorry, that's the Operations tab. And then over in the Physical tab, we have a dam with a control outlet. Downstream control rules are rules that describe a minimum or maximum flow or stage limit at a control point rather than an explicit limit on the reservoir release. What we saw in some of the previous videos were about the release function rules, where we explicitly identified a release. The downstream control rules identify a downstream control point. So let's start by creating our downstream control rule by right-clicking on the zone we want the rule to apply to, and then clicking Add New Rule. All right, let's go ahead and give this rule a name. We'll call it min ds flow. It's going to operate from the reservoir, and then the rule type is going to be downstream control function. One thing to point out, if you select a dam or a controlled outlet, then the downstream control function is not an option. The downstream control function that we're talking about in this lesson is only available to the reservoir element. So there's that table 11.1 of the user's manual that identifies which rule types can be applied to which elements. Okay, so reservoir downstream control element. Now it's also asking us for the downstream location. Now this is any location downstream of the selected reservoir, like a junction or reaches. Junction is most always what you're going to be using. So we have in the map, in the diagram over here to the left, we have control point 3 is the junction, or CP3 is the junction at the dam face downstream of the dam. And then we have junction CP4, which is down here. And then we have a reach CP3 to CP4. Those are the elements identified in this drop down here. I'm going to go ahead and select CP4 as the junction and then click OK. When you have multiple reservoirs in a network that are in parallel, or maybe they're just all upstream of a common downstream control point, then that introduces the idea of a system of reservoirs working together in a network. And that's going to be a common theme, and it's going to come up again big time in chapter 13. That's not a focus of today's video, but I just wanted to mention that that is a common concept with regard to these downstream control rules. I've created my downstream control rule here. It's under zone B. If I go ahead and click apply, watch what happens to the icon around junction CP4. I click it, and then boom, a blue box appears, and that's just a visual cue for the modeler to remember that, oh, this particular element in the network is a target for a downstream control rule. There are many similar features between the downstream control rule and the release function rule, which was described in the previous 3 videos. So those similarities are not going to be discussed in this video, such as the interpolation type of linear, cubic, or step, or the function of, and the details of how the function is defined. I'm going to go ahead and very quickly identify a minimum flow rate based on date. I'm going to paste in some data here, and we'll just change it to step. All right, so there's that. Okay, working on it. Okay, so some of the new ideas associated with downstream control that we haven't talked about is the parameter. That is either flow or stage. Flow is most always used. I'm going to keep it on flow. So we are targeting the flow at the downstream location, which is junction CP4. If you select stage, you'd also have to provide a rating curve so that ResSim can calculate the flow based on the stage, but we'll leave that at flow. The next field I want to discuss is the limit type. We've seen this before, but we don't have specified as an option. It's strictly minimum or maximum. And for this particular rule, I'm going to call this minimum as we are defining the minimum flow of the downstream location at CP4 junction. We also have some release rule modifiers down here in the bottom right of the edit panel. And we've seen some of these before, but the one we haven't seen before is this flow contingency release rule modifier. So if we go ahead and click the checkbox or the edit button, we get the dialog box that pops up. And the whole idea of the flow contingency uh, percentage here, as I understand it, is it accounts for the uncertainty of the cumulative local inflow. Meaning, if we have a downstream control point or junction CP4, and we want to satisfy the minimum flow rate, then there's a chance that the local flow is going to be less than expected, in which case the reservoir would want to release more water so as to satisfy that downstream minimum requirement. So we could just put in a number like 20% and then click OK. Or if you wanted to be a little bit more precise and base that contingency percent on the flow rate, you'd select this other radio button, and then you would want to type in or paste in some values like I've done here to specify the contingency, or you could call it the uncertainty percentage that most likely increases as the flow rate increases. So I'm going to go ahead and click OK and then apply that. So that's it for this video. This was sort of an introduction to the downstream control rules, how it fits in with larger reservoir operations, and then a few of the newer features that we haven't seen in release function rules, such as limit type parameter, flow contingency, and in the next video, I'll be covering advanced options.